Hello and welcome to the 6th video in my JavaScript series for Leaving Cert Computer Science. I am going to answer the question which is task 1 on page 231 of the Quill and Becker book for the Leaving Cert Computer Science. And here's the question. It says create a web page to calculate the volume of a cylinder. The web page has two inputs, one for the height, h, and one for the radius, r. The user should enter these values. The web page also has a button that, when clicked, calculates the volume of the cylinder. The formula V equals pi r squared multiplied by h. Assume that pi is 3.14. You can ignore units, so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about centimeters or meters or whatever. We can ignore the units for this question. And display your answer in an alert box. So let's head over to code.org, open up WebLab, and start coding in JavaScript. So I'm going into WebLab, opening up a new project. The first thing I'm going to do is rename it. I'm going to call it Task 1, page 231, and I'm going to hit save. Okay, that's the first thing you do is rename your project. Now I'm using code.org, so I have my body section here, my HTML section, and I'm going to be doing my JavaScript in here as well. So the very first thing we were asked in the question was to set up inputs from the user for the radius and the height, so that the user would input the radius and the height size of a cylinder. So to do that in HTML is just your input tag, and I'm going to give it an ID so that I can call on it later, and I'm going to say ID equals, and I'm going to call it h in. So this one would be for my height in. I'm just going to put a paragraph before that for the user to understand. Please enter the height of your cylinder and close my paragraph tag. So this is what a preview looks like over here. Please enter the height of your cylinder. Then I'm going to just give it a break using BR. And I'm going to put in another paragraph here. Please enter the radius of your cylinder. And close my paragraph tag there. And put in an input here, an input box for my radius. And I'm going to give this an ID. ID in this case we can just say R in. So basically radius in, height in. That's what these IDs, and I can call on them then when I set up my JavaScript in a moment. So it also asks us to put in a button. So I'm just going to give a couple of breaks here just to keep it looking nice. You can decide that yourselves. And it asks you to put a button that when the button is clicked, that a calculation would be done, and that calculation would be to calculate the volume of the cylinder. So I'm going to put in a button here just using the button tag. And I'm going to say calculate volume on the button. You can decide what you want to call it yourselves. It could just be volume calculation or whatever. And close my button tag. Now, so in my preview, if I just save it and refresh it and have a look, it says please enter the height. And I can enter in numbers in there, so it's interactive, it's input. Please enter enter the radius of your cylinder, and I can enter in there. And I press calculate volume. And at the moment when I press calculate volume, it doesn't do anything. Okay, I could also make that look a little bit nicer if I wanted by just putting in a heading here, say a H3. Which basically just says the volume of a cylinder. Okay, so that's just giving your web page a little bit more definition. Now we have our HTML basically set up. So it's very black and white. I'm not going to worry about styling it. That would be your CSS, as you know. But if we want to actually make this content interactive, do a calculation on it, we need to use JavaScript at this point, because JavaScript is our programming language that makes our website interactive. So at the bottom of my page, I'm going to set up again this kind of, I'm just putting in a comment here in HTML, and I'm going to set up kind of the wall, which is the wall between our HTML and our JavaScript, because these work independently but they communicate with one another. So this isn't necessary. This is just me kind of pointing out that these are two separate pieces of code. This is like one document on top with your HTML and your JavaScript then underneath. So I'm just setting up that to use that analogy for you. And then I'm going to put in my JavaScript, and to put in JavaScript into code.org we use the script tag. And I'm going to close it straight away. If I don't close tags straight away, I tend to forget about them, and that's why I always am in the habit of opening and closing them immediately. It just makes it easier to get it right. So now I have my script open. What am I going to put into my JavaScript? Okay, so I can just put up a comment in JavaScript. A comment in JavaScript is your 2 lines, and you can set up a function. So I'm going to set up a function in my JavaScript that when this button is pressed, it's going to do something. So let's set up a function. So to set up a function in JavaScript is just function. And then the name of the function, you can call it whatever you want. I am going to call this one something got to do with volume. So I can call it calculate volume. Or vol for short. You can decide on the name of your function yourself. Once you use it correctly and calling it correctly, you can call it whatever you like. And you open your curly brackets at this point. Now, if I want that function to be called when the button is pressed, then I better make sure and tell my HTML to do that. So here where I have button before my close angle bracket on my opening tag, I need to put in here on click. And what are we going to do on click? We're going to go to the function. So I just paste it in, and I use copy and paste so that I don't make a spelling mistake. So I pasted in, copied and pasted this in here. So on click equals inside in these quotation marks, and you know you're doing it right because it changes colors. And on click, every time this button here is clicked, it's going to jump down to my JavaScript and do something. Well, what's it going to do? Okay, well, we need the JavaScript to interact with our HTML. The very first thing we need it to do is to take in our height, take in our radius. They come in by default, as you know, as strings. We're going to need to cast them to either integers or floats so that we can do something to them, like calculations. And then we need to use our formula, which is given in our book, for the volume of a cylinder, and we need to get the volume and give it back to the user using an alert function. So in the end result of this is going to be the user seeing what the volume of the cylinder is. Now I'm going to set up a variable here to begin with, and I'm going to call it, to set up a variable in JavaScript, as we know, is you start with var, V-A-R, so variable or var, and then the name of your variable. So I'm going to say h, and I did tell you in the question to use h. If you used height, you would be doing the method correctly, but maybe not answering the question 100%. So it did say to use h in the question, and it's going to be equal to, well, what do we want to get the variable h to be? We want to get the variable h to be whatever the user puts into our HTML document. So we have to call on it using our DOM, which is our document object model, and to do that we have to tell JavaScript to go to the document. So it's document dot, and we're going to get element by ID. So we're going to get our element by ID, and I would encourage you to use the drop down tags, because if you leave out, for example, the capital B there, then you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out why your code's not working. So just use the hints that the code.org give you. And what element do we want to get by ID? Well, we want to get our height, which my input up here, I set it to h in. Again, I'm just going to copy that in. So that's my ID for height h in, and I'm going to paste it there. So what do we want to get out of that? Well, we want to get the value of it. So that's what goes in here, and a semicolon at the end. So dot value. So my variable h equals the document.getElement by ID h in dot value. So the value, so you nearly read it backwards. The value of what's inputted in h in the document. That's what we want to do. Now, when we bring it in, it's going to be by default a string. So I'm going to have to change it to either a float or an integer. Because I know I'm going to be using pi being 3.14, I'm going to just set it to float just for that reason, just to keep them all the same. You can use integer if you wish. There's no problem with that. But of course, if a user put in that their height was 3.5 and you have set yours to integer, then it may cause problems. So perhaps for the height and for the radius, you might just use float. So to do that, it's going to be h equals, and it's a Paris float. That's how it's called. So in Python it was just float, and in JavaScript it's Paris float, and it's equal to the Paris float of h. And put my semicolon at the end. We're going to do the very same thing again for the radius in. So I'm actually going to copy this code and paste it, and then just change the key elements. So I'm going to paste it, and instead of variable h, it's going to be variable r for radius. Instead of h in, it's going to be, as we know, r in. So I'm just going to doubly sure by copying that down. You can just edit it if you want. And it's the value of that. Again, it's not h, it's r. Now if you are copying and pasting, just be really careful that you change everything. So you have to change it in 1, 2, 3, 4 places. And again, make sure you have your semicolons at the end of your sentences. The end of your lines of code rather. So now we have put in our h, we have our variable h or variable r, and we have casted them both to floats. The next thing we want to do is have a look at the question, and the question says use the formula v equals pi r squared h. So it tells you to assume that pi is 3.14. So I'm going to set up a new variable now. So variable v for volume equals, and what does it equal to? Well, it is equal to pi r squared h. There's a couple of ways we can do this. I'll show you the first one. So it's telling you to assume pi is 3.14. So let's go with 3.14. Multiplied by r squared. Well, let's just do individually first. The most simple and straightforward way to do it, which is r by r. R squared is r multiplied by itself, as you all know. Multiplied by h. Your multiplication symbol in JavaScript is your star sign. Don't forget that. And so your variable b is equal to pi r squared h, and we want an alert that's going to print out the volume of your cylinder is, and I'm going to play plus the. Make sure I put my semicolon at the end. It's very easy to forget it on the very last hurdle, so just be careful. And then we're going to try it out. So I'm going to go to my preview, and I'm going to say give me the height of your cylinder. Say I pick a cylinder that is of height 2 and a radius 2, and I click on calculate volume. And here I have the volume of your cylinder is 25.12. Now I'm going to presume that's correct, but in testing your JavaScript, you go and get your calculator and make sure that it's correct. So let's make sure we test it properly. Remember, if you test your code like this, you won't be coming up with errors. So let's pop it in. We said our radius was 2 and our height was 2, and our formula is 3.14 multiplied by our radius, which is 2 by 2, radius squared, multiplied by our height, which is also 2 in this case, and that gives me 25.12. So that's my first test complete. Now, I would be encouraging you to do more than one test. I'm just running out of time here now, so you test it a couple of times. Thank you for listening to this tutorial.